Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me out there? The board met in executive session already, and we did the flag salute. So at this point, we're up to a roll call. Mr. McLaughlin.
Mr. Burr? Here. Ms. Schaefer?
Here.
Mrs. Gray? Here. Mr. Savage? Here. Mrs. White?
Here.
Mrs. Richmond?
Here.
Mrs. Corn?
Here.
Mrs. Woolbridge?
Here.
Mr. Martin?
Here.
Mr. Sy?
Here.
Ms. Fox?
Here.
Ms. McKee?
Here.
Madam President?
I just would like to draw your attention to this in your agenda. This is a regular meeting of the Board of Education. It was advertised as per the There are 2 times for public comment in the meeting. The first one is for public comment or questions on agenda items. So if you have a question about listed on the agenda or anything in the presentations at the beginning of the meeting, that will be the time to do that. And then later in the meeting, there's a public comment for items where you can comment or question on any other topics that you're interested in. Also like to point out that the meeting is being recorded. Okay. Really? I don't think it's where I'm holding it. Okay. Okay, we're up to the student representative, Jimmy Gao.
Hi, so everything's been going pretty well at Ridge. All the student activities are continuing as usual. People are doing the things that they want to be doing and hopefully doing them well. We as a student government are preparing for our annual volleyball tournament. That's going to be the last day of the winter break, which is on December. Well, hopefully there'll be more and more of a buzz around as the time approaches. From this mic and shout. Would that help?
Well, we're trying to record it, so that's why we're trying to keep it on.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
2 things that I wanted to bring up. One, which will probably elicit more discussion than the other. So, students have brought to my attention something that I'm really consider, which is whether the school has or the district has policy or at least an algorithm it uses to determine what ethnic, religious, or cultural holidays are given off. So I've heard requests for Eid or Lunar New Year or Diwali to be off. I know obviously we can't accommodate every single ethnic, cultural, or religious group in the township, or else we would never have school. But I definitely wanted to know, I guess, have an answer for the people who are inquiring about that. The second one's a little lighter. People complain that the hand dryers in the school bathrooms aren't strong enough. So I don't really know what you guys can do about that, but I was asked to bring that up as well.
I can agree about the hand dryers, at least in the one by the pack that I use before board meetings. It takes a little while to dry your hands. As far as the calendar and holidays, it's obviously a complicated issue, and we've spent lots of time in the past looking at our calendar. And like you said, if we start giving off more days, we've actually aside from adding Diwali, last 2 years ago, to the calendar, we actually, before that, had reduced some of the single holidays because it's kind of very hard to get the entire school year in and graduate by the 20th. I think, it's partly just based on the numbers of people in town. It's not like you can give everyone, there's 180 holidays, I think, listed by the state of New Jersey that are all recognized holidays, and if anyone celebrates them, they can take time to make up their work. So there's a lot of holidays. So it is very complicated. So there's not an official policy for how we decide which ones are off. Anyone else have anything in response to Jimmy or any questions for Jimmy? Okay. The board is going to move down below. We have 2 presentations. We have game design and development with Mr. Isaacs, and then we have a demographer's. I'm going to go down there, and I think board members have a hard copy for the demographer's report here to bring down.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us, especially Mr. Isaacs. Mr. Isaacs came today. Oh, and I see his lovely wife. Kathy, how are you? Nice to see you. Thank you for supporting your husband today. So, yeah, I don't understand why my wife isn't at all these meetings. So, in any case, one of the things that we like to do periodically throughout the year is try to take some opportunities to learn about some fun things that the students are doing, not particular to a particular, not specific to a particular competition or having won a particular championship or anything of that nature, but just to learn about something that's happening in the school district that we're proud of and that we want to share. So I asked the staff to kind of think about that, and the administrators of each building, and they're kind of talking to some of their teachers and asking them, hey, what could we share with the Board of Ed and the public that would be fun to pass along? So one of the things that came up was the game design and development program that Mr. Isaacs has been doing, and now I believe taken up at the high school with some activity as well. So Steve, thanks for coming tonight, and the floor is yours. Yep, we need an clicker.
Thanks, everybody. Can you hear me okay? So first off, I'd really like to thank, I guess it's Thanksgiving week, right? I could give thanks for a number of things. The district has been extremely supportive of my efforts over the last 20 plus years. About 15 years ago, I had what seemed to me at the time to be a crazy idea to start a game design and development course at our middle school, in a public middle school in New Jersey. And fortunately, my supervisor at the time, Brian Heineman, and my principal, Karen Hudak, both were very supportive. I didn't know what that was going to look like when I went to pitch this idea. They were both very supportive, and we were able to start this. And for me, it's just been an amazing, amazing journey. Also to thank, the PTOs. The PTO, especially here, has been extremely supportive over the years. If you've been to room 322's, the computer lab, where most of the game design stuff happens, if you haven't been, come by sometime. We have a pretty neat setup in there. So my mission as an educator is to create a choice-based environment. My kids have a lot of choice in what they do. The classroom is meant to model like a game design studio. Kids are taking on different roles that are, roles you would take in the game design industry. And it's like I said, it's a really cool setup, I think. And I think the kids kind of get that feeling like they have this neat space to work and learn in. And some of the things that we do through the course, and I have some of my great students here who are going to share a little bit about their experiences, but a lot of what we do at the beginning is analyze games, both digital and non-digital. Kids learn about game mechanics and all sorts of things about making games. And ultimately, one of the most important things is learning the iterative design process, which really applies to engineering classes and many other classes as well, where the kids go through this whole process of designing, developing, getting peers to test their games, peer feedback, iterating on their design, and ultimately publishing a game. Some of the things we've been able to do, which has been really neat, is work with some industry professionals. So I'll have people come in via Skype or even in person and talk to the kids about what's happening in the game industry. And some of that's tutorial based, some of it's more talking about career opportunities and things like that. We've been doing a lot with augmented reality and virtual reality, which I'll share a little more about as well. But basically they're, from start to finish, going through the whole game design process. These are some of the tools the kids are using. One that recently has become available is Fortnite has a creative mode. So think of it like Minecraft meets Fortnite. So the kids are able to create games in that environment. Minecraft has been a tremendous success with kids in terms of automating things in their games. Super Mario Maker allows them to create for like the Nintendo Switch and things like that. The one in the middle at the top there is something called Twine, where kids can make text-based adventures. And this is a really great opportunity for kids that actually enjoy writing and all that. So every once in a while I get the kid who really wants to write and write and write and write and write they do to create their game. And then some of the industry standards like Unreal Engine and Unity And one of the things about the high school course that I'm so excited about is that while, you know, some of the, like the kids are learning some of these skills in the middle school, they come up to the high school and they're a lot, you know, they, you know, as the kids develop and their skills develop, some of the things they'll be able to do at the high school that maybe they couldn't, you know, as easily at the middle school start to come out as well. And then in terms of XR, or augmented and virtual reality, about 5 years ago, we started to be part of, we applied and were part of a research on, it's really the largest research in virtual reality in the classroom. And the focus that I wanted to go with, they basically, when you apply to be part of this research study, they ask what you want to focus on, and ours was on content creation. So for me, it's always about what can I get the kids creating. So now they're creating content for virtual and augmented reality. Just recently, we found out that I was announced the recipient of one of the EPIC mega grants. So with that, one of the things that comes with that is 2 Magic Leap headsets. Anybody ever see a Magic Leap headset? They're like these augmented reality headsets. So in addition to a lot of the VR headsets we already have, I'm excited to get those and get kids developing for those. And with that, so another real quick interesting story before I bring my 7th graders up. For some reason that, you know, only, you know, Genesis might know the answer to, we ended up with a cycle right now that is all girls, which is interesting to me, especially because one of the challenges we've always had in the 8th grade elective and beyond is that it's mostly boys that sign up. So a number of years ago, we changed the 7th grade cycle to be game design and digital storytelling so that all kids in 7th grade get an experience in game design, which will then, you know, allow them to at least have context when they go to consider the 8th grade elective. This cycle, I have this amazing experience of having a cycle with all girls, and I don't know, I'm having a blast, and I hope that the girls are as well. But anyway, so I know when I asked if any of them would like to present at the board meeting, like a whole mess load of hands went up. So we have 4, we would have had 5, one might be not feeling well, but I have 4 girls who will come up and share their stories about what they're doing in class. Come on up, girls. Eva really wanted to use a clicker tonight. You can just stay right here.
Good evening. My name is Eva Tierney. The final project we did was to make a world based on a fairy tale, and I chose Beauty and the Beast. In the story Beauty and the Beast is injured and needs healing. The player has to maneuver themselves through the game and also fight 3 obstacles: fighting a pack of wolves, killing 3 deadly spiders, and surviving a surprise attack from villagers. That green-gray building by the brown building is where the player has to heal the beast because the beast is hurt. This is the glass bridge where the player will have to be led to the beast once they have the medicine. In this class, sky's the limit with creativity. And every day, I come to class and have fun with my friends building whatever we want. Before, I had no interest with computer design and computer coding, but ever since the first day in Mr. Isaac's class, I wanted to be a computer designer. Thank you.
This is one of our students, Grace, could not be here today, but she did her story based on the little match girl, and I'll just kind of run you through her slides. And I'll tell you something. So this is a little bit of code that she used for her non-player characters. And one of the cool things is Grace happens to be really good at Minecraft and really into games and things. So the first few days when we started playing Minecraft, she was essentially, I think, helping everybody. She was the second teacher for sure.
Hi everybody, my name is Arya Ravel. I'm in 7th grade and I'm in Mr. Isaac's second period. Also, that was really good, goodies. Good job. So, I honestly had a really good experience with the computer cycle this year, a lot better than last year. And it wasn't that my teacher was bad or that my classmates were mean or even that the content was boring. I was just really, really bad at it, you know? But honestly, it was really embarrassing and discouraging for me when I would see my other classmates making these beautiful, colorful advertisements, and mine was just boring and not as good as theirs. However, Mr. Isaac's class really provided an environment where I definitely felt the non-experienced gamer and coder, which really helped me be able to ask questions and try different things without feeling embarrassed I was going to make a mistake. So over there, we have me and my friends, the people I worked with. We made a game based off the fairy tale, The Three Little Pigs. And over there we have me, my friend Kylie, and my friend Samantha outside our wooden house, which I'll tell you guys about in a bit. Okay, so first we have the sand house. So basically, after you get through the lobby and stuff, where there are obstacles, you have to break through walls, collect things, defeat monster fish, you get over here to the sand house. And I built this house. It has sandstone, it has torches, windows, and it has stained glass. I don't know how the NPC has to fall through it, but whatever. So basically, an NPC is a non-player character, and basically what they're there for is to help the player get places, teleport them, give them things, and the creator of the game can make the NPC do practically whatever they want. So this NPC in particular tells the player to follow certain signs to get to the wood house, which is the house after. So after you get through the wood house, there are a few signs and obstacles that lead you to the brick house. So over here we have this thing called a parkour, and the NPC, when you click on it, tells you oh no, there's an earthquake, you have to get through this obstacle to get to the top of the house, and then you proceed from there. And then those are my friends Kylie and Samantha in the back again. Now finally, after the brick house, we have a mini underwater maze almost, where you just go through, there are signs to lead you there again. And then finally you get over here and the NPC says that, good job, you made it, now you can keep on experimenting throughout the world and keep building. And so, yeah, that's basically my game. So now we have Jordan presenting her game about Belle? What was it? Oh, Snow White. Sorry.
Good evening. My name is Jordan Bachman, and I'm part of Mr. Isaac's 7th grade game design cycle. It's a really great cycle that I really enjoy doing, and I feel much more confident about gaming. Here is where we discover how you have to find out how Snow White is going to be rescued. This game takes you through a challenging parkour courses and how you fight mobs at the end of the castle and rescue Snow White. Here's one of the parkour courses that we have so that you gain some knowledge on how to go through them. This here, on the picture on the left, is where Snow White was rescued, and it's a coincidence that she's in a snow background. The picture to the right is where you have to fight with some mobs to be able to rescue her. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Meredith Russ, and I'm one of the students in Mr. Isaac's computer cycle class. Here, we learn about how to design games and how to tell a story through digital games such as GameStar Mechanic and Minecraft Education Edition. For my story or fairy tale, I chose Peter Pan. To convey the story, we used an NPC, which is a non-playable character, to welcome the player into the game and to give them the proper tools on how to get to Neverland. On their way, they will have to complete a series of parkour and obstacle courses. During class, we learn about coding, and we use an agent to build things like towers, bridges, and buildings. Telling a story through digital game really brings the fairy tale to life in a unique way. You get to see a different point of view or a different way of the story that is being told. In 8th grade, there is an option to take a digital game design class as an elective. After learning about coding and game design, I think that I would like to try it out as an elective next year. Overall, this class was an exciting, unique experience that made coding a fun, hands-on learning experience. Thank you.
So thank you. Let's hear it again for this speech. I would say, a very interesting note. There's a lot of talk about programs for, like Girls Who Code, and there's one called Girls Who Game. It's definitely much more of interest to me to start a program like that. It's been really, really interesting to see, and I don't know if it's something we, as a district might want to even think about or look at more. I've been teaching this 7th grade cycle for many, many, many years, and seeing a group that was all girls really, come to life and not feel that they were having to hold back or anything has been really tremendous. So I can't really say enough about the time that we're having. I'm going to be sad when this group leaves, but thank you all for coming tonight. I appreciate it. I also have a few of my high school students that are going to come up as well, Nikita and Jason, who will share a little bit about their experiences.
Hi, my name is Nikita, and I'm in the 10th grade. Well, I'm in 10th grade, and I'm taking the game design elective. And I decided to take the game design elective because I've always been interested in gaming. I take a lot of art courses at Bridge. I'm in honors art, and the art part of game design has always interested me, and I thought taking this course would allow me to explore that, and it did. So far, it's been really fun, and as you can see, I've done 2 major projects in this class. One of them was modifying a card game, and the other was a Rube Goldberg. You guys know who Rube Goldberg is, right? He was just, he made big contraptions for simple tasks, and we were tasked to make a version of a Rube Goldberg machine in one of these games. We had the option of Fortnite Creative Mode, or we could do Minecraft, which was the more popular option as it does have more options and people are more comfortable in Minecraft, from what I can tell. And I think it turned out pretty well. I enjoyed doing it. I'm not very good with Minecraft, I'm not the best with redstone. I never really explored that. I more went the straightforward, vanilla, survival mode, just because I wanted to I wanted to challenge myself. But it was really cool getting to see that side of Minecraft, and my friend Sam, who worked on this with me, is a lot more experienced with it than I am. In the end, it turned out really cool. Although I didn't do a lot of the heavy lifting when it came to the redstone aspect, I did help. I did the sketch for it, and I just did the basic stuff, even though she had the most mechanical expertise in it. And for the card game, I did do a lot more work, and I actually enjoyed this one a lot more than I enjoyed the Rube Goldberg one, just because of the artistic side of it. I did the card designs for it digitally, and I printed them out, laminated them, did the sketches, and we added additional aspects to the game. The game we decided to modify was Sushi Go, which is a really interesting card game. I've never really played a card game like it before. Rather than, Go Fish or like Uno, where you place a card in the center and it's all like, oh, luck of the draw. Sushi Go is a bit more, you pass cards around and you pick one and you try and make sets in combination. And we wanted to play off that aspect of the game, so we added a, how'd you call it? It's not coming to me right now. It's like a combo sort of system where if you build up a certain amount of cards or certain types of cards, you can get something that would be even more powerful than the other cards and give you more points. So in our case, we added one called Voodoo Doll, since we made a Halloween-themed deck, where if you got like a pumpkin and a candle and granny candies and things like that, it would become a voodoo doll, which you would use to steal cards from other players at the end, and it would get you more points. And I think this really made the game a lot more interesting because when we were playing it, we thought, this needs a bit more spice, you know, a bit more of that Halloween flavor. Just because I felt it was a bit bland. You were just drawing cards, you were picking which ones had the most points. It wasn't as in-depth as we wanted it to be. So adding that combo mechanic made people focus more on the game and made it less of a game where they just pick the card and wait for everyone else to go and just move on with it. So far, I'm really enjoying the course. I'm kind of sad that I only have one marking period left. But I hope I won't get too ambitious and actually get my projects done on time this time. I'm always like running a bit behind just because I want to do more than I physically can. And I think that's good because that shows that I am enjoying it and I want to do as much as I can in this course. But I also hope that I can explore more aspects of the game design side.
And for this note, and Jason is one of the students that there are a few that I've had in 8th grade and then have also been fortunate enough to have now in high school. So here's Jason.
Hi, I'm Jason. I've taken this class in 8th grade and now 10th grade. All right. So I've taken this class twice. I took it in 8th grade and now I'm taking it in 10th grade again because the class was added to the high school curriculum. And I was really excited when I heard about it because game design is one of those classes that you can kind of revisit multiple times and you always have a new experience you can have in the class. There's so much potential and so many things you can do in the class that I think is really cool. I think it's really unique because, for example, the first time that I was in this class, I chose to go with the Minecraft route like everybody else and most of the people were doing because it was easier and more simple for the time period that I was in when I was in 8th grade. And we and one of my friends made a death run course that was very intricate and we took a lot of time to do it. We took two classes a day usually, like during lunch and during class to work on it because we enjoyed it so much during the class. And after school, we also did work on it because it was just so fun and we always enjoyed doing it because it was so unique compared to everything else in the school. And after the marking period ended, or after the semester ended, we got an opportunity to present our game at a Minecraft event because it was so well done, I think. And these are some pictures of me and my friend Brian at the event with all the kids that were playing it. And it was a really cool experience because you can't really get this sort of thing with most classes that you're in, you know? Like science and math. It's sort of straightforward, but for this class you can do so much and get so far with it. And I was really happy that I got this opportunity, and I got to do the class twice because I got a whole new experience. Like this time, the Fortnite Creative came out recently, and I decided to do something with that because I wanted to change it up and try something new. And we made a racing game, me and my group are currently working on it. And it's really exciting because with game design, there's always something that they haven't explored yet. There's always new things you can try and succeed with. And it's really cool also because now that I've taken the class once, and I'm in the class again, I can sort of teach people in the class how to do some things that I'm already familiar with and they're not as familiar with because they're new, of course. And we're sort of in the creating stage of the Fortnite thing, so I'm not really sure how it's going to go yet. Hopefully as well as the first thing. And these are some pictures of the game so far. We haven't really gotten too far with it yet, but this is about a week's worth of work on it. And we're hoping that it's going to get similar traction and it's going to be a good result like the first project that I did in 8th grade for Minecraft. So yeah, I think it would be really cool also if we had like another class potentially in high school that I could do because the more classes like this, the cooler it is because there's so many more things you can try to do with it. Like I could try a different game creating thing or something like that, like Unity or something, just to keep exploring the realm. And yeah, that's all I really have to say.
That's actually a great segue because when it comes to what I've been thinking and hoping for the course, first off, it was for years I wanted to bring the course up to the high school, so I'm thrilled beyond belief that we have the course there now, and it is neat to see what the kids can do at the high school level. My goal in time is to create multiple levels of the course. I really want to pursue further that game design studio model. Kids are publishing games. Kids can really go quite far, as Jason was saying. I've also spoken with one of the computer science teachers, and I would love to see the potential for a game programming course where the computer science class could do the coding side of something like Unreal Engine or Unity and work collaboratively with my kids. At the middle school, we did have a really neat experience when there was a creating music class here. The kids in that class created music for games for the kids in the 8th grade class. So I'd love to revisit things like that and working with the art teachers as well in time. So we'll see how that goes, but I'm really excited about what's possible at the high school. And I would have loved to show you a lot of the projects and things, but if you check out any of these links, our YouTube channel has a lot of the kids' final projects, like the Rube Goldberg project that Nikita was talking about. You can see a bunch of those, and all these are resources with student work and things. So feel free to take some pictures and visit us after and follow what we're doing. Thank you so much, everybody.
All right, thanks guys so much. Great job. Really awesome. So I had a couple suggestions, right, for the driving game. Can you do like a couple like score meters in the corners that show like points on your driver's license and the cost of your car insurance? Some crashing event. That's great job, great job. And for the 7th grade, the thing that goes through my head was those escape rooms. You know, so you do an escape room night, right? Really awesome. You guys had such great ideas. You could make an awesome escape room. It sounded really fun. So anyway, thanks again for coming tonight. I really appreciate you guys coming out and supporting Mr. Isaacs and sharing the activities that you guys are doing in the class. It's really awesome. And if that just may happen, then it'll improve our technical situation. I apologize for the microphone. Not quite sure what's going on, but we'll see if we can make it a little bit better. With that said, looking for Dr. Grip. Dr. Grip is over here. Excellent. So let me transition here for just a second. Do this. Testing, testing. Hopefully that's better. Okay, so moving along in our agenda, we actually have a second presentation. Sorry, Dr. Grip, the kids are always a tough act to follow, but we had Dr. Grip, Dr. Richard Grip, produce for us back in 2017 a demographic study following the footsteps of a gentleman that had done the demographics for the town for quite some time, and it was a tough act to follow because that person did it for free. So I'm just setting poor Dr. Grip up, but in any event, the 2017 study was completed, and then in contemplation of some potential construction, we asked Dr. Grip to update the report. We know that the town has approved to most degrees, almost all of the recently proposed projects are just about in final approval phase at this point. And so we asked Dr. Grip to take his report from 2017 and give us an update, let us know how he saw the construction impacting our enrollments overall over the next several years. And obviously that was also important in consideration of the plans that we have for high school, master schedule change at the high school, and potential facility needs associated with that master schedule. So with that said, I bring you Dr. Richard Grip to go over the 2019 updated demographic report.
Thanks for the kind introduction. Yes, it is hard to follow students, that's for sure, but if they're still here, and I know they probably already bugged out, I don't blame them, but my neighbor, this is a true story, invented Guitar Hero. And you're familiar with that game? So game theory behind me here and game design, there is hope for all. And he's a multi-quadrillionaire, and so there, you keep up with the hard work, there's always hope. So yes, as Dr. Markarian stated, this is an update to a study that was performed 2 years ago. It's almost about 2 years to about the day that I was here. And tonight's study is, the presentation to be shorter, because the scope was more or less taking a look at how things have changed in the last 2 years with respect to the new housing and new developments within Burns Township. So just a little bit of a blurb about who I represent. This is my firm. It's called Statistical Forecasting. I used to live in New Jersey. Actually, I used to teach right down the road in Bridgewater, Raritan. Left there in about 2001. I currently live in Vermont, and made the trip down here to speak to y'all guys and came through a blizzard to get me. No, just kidding. But our firm has been working with school districts in the metropolitan area for the last 20 years, more than about 150 or so. Now we're expanding into the Virginia area, and we're the demographic consultant in New York City Public Schools for the last 13 years, the largest district in the country. So I'm the executive director. I have a doctorate right up the road from my Scarlet Knights. We won't talk about them from a football perspective. But from the Graduate School of Education in Educational Statistics and Measurement, most of us wind up working for the College Board and looking at psychometric-related questions with respect to AP score, AP testing, or SATs, but that's not what I wanted to do, so I went to more applied fields such as demography. I do a lot of testifying in the state for school districts that want to get a divorce from each other when they have send-receive. You just cannot walk up and get out of your relationship in another district, so they bring in experts like us to determine whether there's a negative demographic and racial impact. So what's the purpose of this study? The purpose was, like I said at the outset, was to update the projections that we did in 2017, 2 years ago. And most people would say that a demographic study, if you don't know what it is, the crux of it is projecting school enrollments. So we project for a 5-year period from the 2021 school year out to 24-25. First question I always get from the public or board members is, why can't you do more than 5 years, go out to 10 years or 15 or whatever? And the real problem becomes is you have to start then projecting kids who haven't been born yet. And that's a really tough thing to do when you have a small community such as your own. I do it for the city of New York, but the scale, of course, is completely different. So we don't go beyond 5 years. That's really a state thing. I could do it, but the reliability, particularly at the elementary level, is not as good. Middle and high isn't as bad because you're just carrying students forward for years 6 to 10. What other things were done in this report? Well, I looked at the historical enrollments not only by district-wide, but by elementary, middle, and high, because they each tell a story of where you're going into the future. Another thing that was done was we got birth data from the state at the census block level. Now, the census block, now if you're aware, we're doing a census in 2020 next year. It's an exciting time in my life. But the census blocks are tiny, tiny geographical units that are within a municipality. And they were able to give me births by census blocks so we could then aggregate them by your 4 elementary attendance areas. We'll talk about that in a moment. And the last thing, and this is probably why some of you are probably here tonight, is that last bullet down there. What's the impact of all this new development that's proposed on your school system? Okay, that might be the elephant in the room. All right, so this picture here is just showing a map of the township. It's showing all the different schools. You can't see that, of course, from where you're sitting, but they're all located there. The next slide is showing the 4 elementary attendance zones and the locations of each of the 4 elementary schools as well. So in this study, some school districts I don't project at the school level because the districts don't want that. They just want the K-12 totals, and that's fine. This particular district, your district, wanted me to project enrollments for all the schools. So I'm basically projecting enrollments at the lowest level of geography, which is your school levels, and aggregating up to get the total district-wide enrollments. A little history about what's been happening here. So in 1920, which is this current year, as of October 15th, this is our census day for school districts, is around October the 15th. Your enrollment was 5,117 students. Enrollment has been, as you're aware, declining for the last 6 years. In the previous study, I talked about why that is. It's a changing age structure in your community where you have more people middle age, you have less people having children. You're going through that cycle, which many communities are in New Jersey, where they're having a decline in births. In the last 6 years, you've lost 635 students. That is a tremendous number when you're talking about an enrollment of about 5,100 students. It's a lot, percentage-wise. So to project enrollments, we use something called the cohort survival ratio method. It was developed in the 1930s, roughly. And we'll talk about that in a moment, how we project enrollment. It's not rocket science. Not compared to what the game designers do. Gosh, I don't know where to begin. So this is the historical enrollments for the district for the last 10 years. And you can see, here's your peak right up here in 13, 14, a little bit over 57, 50 students, and you've just been trending down for the last 6 years. But this might be the most important slide of tonight, because it really is going to foreshadow what happens into the future. So hopefully you can see that way in the back there, but the elementary enrollment, middle and high, is shown in this slide historically for the last 10 years. Elementary is up on top, and take a look at what's happened in elementary enrollment from after the 13-14 year when you peaked around 2,513 students. It's been going steadily down. That is one train you cannot get out of the way of, because those smaller cohorts in the elementary levels have to move through the system into middle and high school. And when that happens, guess what? Those configurations are going to decline as well. It would take something earth-shattering to overcome that trend. Okay, I haven't seen it happen. You have to have like a surge of people moving in and a tremendous amount of housing growth or something like that. This one down in the middle is the high school. You can see that it's been declining for the last 3 or 4 years, as well as the middle school. So guess what? Those trends of declining enrollment at the elementary level have already started to progress up into the upper levels. So the cohort survival ratio method is something fairly simple. What we do is we take a look at the survival rate of students. I put that in quotes because no one's dying here. But it's the progression rate of students from one grade to the next over time. So I give a simple example. So if you have 100 first graders in the 18-19 year, once they advance to 19-20 as second graders, we assume that you have close to 100 students. But of course, you know, people move in and move out during the summer and things like that. So let's say you have 95 second graders. That survival rate is 95 over 100 or 0.95. We compute survival ratios for all the grade progressions, 11 to 12, 8 to 9, so on and so forth, including birth to kindergarten, which is a 5-year progression. So there's 13 different ratios. I take a look at that for a 10-year period to see if there's any patterns or changes in the ratios over time. We then compute an average of what the ratio is for each one of these grade progressions, and we apply it to the most recent enrollment in the 1920 year to figure out what your enrollment is going to be in the future. So the key assumption with this method is that the historical patterns in your district are going to continue in the future. So if these ratios are very different in the future, your projections are not going to be as accurate, okay? So stability is important for a district. So in your particular case, anytime you see a value below 1, that means you are losing students to outward migration. If it's above 1, you're gaining students. So out of the 13 ratios that I just talked about, 9 of them are above 1, which means that, in general, most grades, you're gaining students from one year to the next. That means inward migration. Okay, migration is one of the things that changes a district's enrollment. So I'll talk about some birth rates or another one. The ones that were below 1.00, meaning outward migration, 3 of the 4 were at the high school level. It's not too surprising. This is an affluent area, and people choose to go to private high schools in the surrounding area. I used to teach at Del Bar, so I kind of get that. So averages, like I said, were used to compute future enrollments of these ratios into the future. So the phenomenon that you have here is something called negative kindergarten replacement. And what it means, as you see right in the slide up there, it's been happening actually for the last 9 years. It's when the number of graduating 12th grade students is more than the incoming kindergarten students replacing them in the next year. So what that means is, for instance, if you have 500 seniors graduating, to keep your enrollment at a net zero, you would need 500 kindergarten students the next year. You're not getting that. You might get 400 kindergarten students. So you're down 100 students before you even leave the gate, okay? So in the last 9 years, this has been occurring. And it's been getting worse over time because your kindergarten classes are getting smaller, and what was left of the boom period of the bigger 12th graders, they're leaving. Okay, they're finally graduating. And the average from the last 4 years, you're losing an average of 202 students per year. So here's the graph. So for a district to stay even in their enrollment projections, you have to get inward migration of students into the district that is going to match, say, in that last one there, about 226 and a half kids. That's a lot, okay? To balance out the enrollment, that's what you need. This slide here is kind of cool. It's showing the kindergarten replacement with respect to total enrollment change. Year over year, K to 12, what's the change? So what's interesting here? That's in dark blue. All of those bars are less negative than the kindergarten replacement. What does that mean? You do have inward migration in this district that is reducing overall magnitude of the negative kindergarten replacement. It's just not enough to overcome it. You did overcome it back in the early part of the last decade, when the kindergarten replacement wasn't as much. But now, that's pretty hard to do. So, I did explain to you a moment ago that 9 or 13 ratios are above 1. That's showing the inward migration. This is really showing it right here. Because if the blue lines were deeper down, more negative, that would mean you have outward migration on top of that, which would compound the problem, but you don't. So let's talk about those birth counts. So in our industry, in fact, I might be writing a paper about this in a short amount of time. Birth counts are used to project kindergarten students 5 years later. There's been a lot of talk about whether that's really an accurate metric which to use to project kindergarten students. However, in our industry, we've done some research, and really that's the best metric that we have. Okay, 5 years later tells you how many kindergarten students are on your doorstep. Take a look at the birth data in that second bullet. In just 14 years ago, you had 282 births in the township, only half of that in 17, at 141. It's unsustainable, okay, for a district to more increase the enrollment when you look at that statistic, okay? So, as a result, your kindergarten enrollment has declined from 342 to 234 as of the current year. Not as big of a drop as you might expect as the births because of inward migration. Mostly with parents wanting to move into this district to get this great education that they're getting when their kids are born perhaps somewhere else, but they move when they're just about to attend kindergarten or maybe first grade. That's what we see. And I'll show you you'll see it really in a minute. Births did increase this year, however, in the 18 year to 171. Is that a start of a new trend? We need more data to see that. So right now I can't say, but it did go up by 30 births in the 18 year. We don't have any data for this year as of yet. So like I said, inward migration has reduced the impact of the lower birth counts on kindergarten. This is a telling table. It shows the birth years on in the second column, birth counts I should say. How many students come 5 years later? And then the birth to kindergarten ratio, which is simply the kindergarten students divided by the births 5 years prior. What we're seeing here in the last 2 years, basically what this means is you're gaining about 50 to 57% of born children that were born 5 years later, right? So you had 154 births in the township in 14. This year you have 234 births. You picked up 80 kids that were born in other towns. So When I did the projections the last time, I was pretty much on target, except I underestimated the kindergarten enrollment. Why? Because you had never had, these are the last 2 years that I just did, you had never had any ratios this high before. So this is going into another plane that we've never seen. When do we see things like this? Usually when the housing market is hot, because people would want to move and buy homes here with families that are under the age, with children under the age of 5. It's not going to be senior citizens buying homes here. So there's your birth counts going forward. Sorry, not forward, going back, actually from 05 to 18. This is the births by attendance area. So remember how I told you I got the birth counts by census block? So we have a mapping software program called Maptitude. It's able to take what's called a shape file of your elementary attendance areas and do what's called an overlay of capturing some of the births by elementary attendance area. And what we see historically, the Liberty Corner School had the most births over that time period, and the Mount Prospect had the fewest. When we look at the difference between the 05 year and the 18 year, which is this last row right here, each of the elementary attendance areas have had lower births in the 18 year as compared to the 05 year, except the Mount Prospect had the biggest decline. A lot of the developments like the hills are in there, and I think they're kind of aged out. I think that's why we're seeing that. But this is an interesting chart, and this is showing where the hot spots are for births back in the 05 year. Red and orange would be where the most births are in a census block. And I'm going to fast forward this to 18 year. I'm using the same scale. Let's see if we got any reds or oranges. Guess what? They're all gone. So the births have really declined in the township. And that's not surprising to see after what I've been telling you for the last 10 minutes. So this is the slide that you might want to focus in on. This is the new residential development that is planned in the township. The township was great in providing the data to me. The problem 2 years ago was that we did not have the bedroom distributions of some of the new developments. Now we have them. Once we have them, we can make a better estimation of how many kids are going to come out of all these units. Now, if you were to sum up, it shows you the elementary attendance area as well of where these are located. Dewey Meadow, Mountain View, Crown Court, and Minebrook. If you sum it up, it's 494. Let's just say 500 units. This makes for a great soundbite for a newspaper. 500 housing units in Burns Township. It's going to rock the schools. I can just see it. But the reality is, people, is that the number of units is not really the issue. It's the type of units. A detached single-family home will generate way more children than an apartment or a townhouse will. Okay, so when I look at this, I don't get crazed by the number, I start looking at the type. And you can see the only one that really has detached single-family homes is a very small development called Minebrook, which is 12 detached single-family homes. The rest are affordable apartments, market rate apartments, and townhouses. Truth be told, affordable apartments do yield more students than market rate apartments. That is true. So my job here was to take some data that I had from the 2017 study, which tells me how many children we can expect based upon your housing data from apartments, townhouses, and single-family homes to estimate what the future impact would be. So it tells you the breakdown of the bedroom distribution, so on and so forth. There's one development that was in the previous study that is not in this one, and that's the redevelopment of the quarry. Okay? That was withdrawn. Will there potentially be a possibility that that could be redeveloped? Absolutely. But I'm only looking at what's on the table right now, and not what might happen in the future. The new development that's up there, which has not been approved yet, is the Mountain View development, which would have about 260 apartments and townhouses. So as I said, we use something called student yields, which is a fancy word for what we call a multiplier. And it tells us how many children come out of certain types of housing units. And I used 2017 study data to estimate that in this study because yields don't really change that much over time, very little. It's not worth your money to have me do it again. So when we do that in the 17 study, we are joining your student address database to the property database of the township. It's a very specific data join just for you guys and no one else. So it's just particular to your community. And this is what we get. That a detached single-family home will yield about 1.1 children. A townhouse or a condo or a duplex, about 0.3. And that's the average. There, in the report that you see for me, for this particular report, and the last one, there are townhouse complexes and condo complexes with more or less than 0.30. But that's the average. In apartments, there really aren't that many. There's a mix of market rate and affordable apartments in the Crown Court complex, and that yield is 0.61. So I use those values going forward to estimate the number of children. And the magic number is, after we do all the mathematics, about 226 children out of the 494 units. Most of them will be in the Cedar Hill or Liberty Corner elementary attendance areas. As we talked about, that's where those developments are. There's the breakout for each one of the 4 developments. And based upon what the historical construction is in this particular township, we take a look and see if the future residential construction is greater than the historical, because the historical construction is built in to the survival ratios. So we don't want to double count kids that are already incorporated into the survival ratios just by adding in the 226 children. So we do look at the historical period, and we do make an adjustment to your baseline enrollment projections and add those additional children into the baseline counts. And what we get, well, before I get to that, this is what your home sales are looking like for the last 30 years. And you're aware, of course, the housing market crashed right here, 2008, 2011, one of the worst stretches of real estate. If there are any realtors in the room, I'm sure you'll concur. But here was a boom time, late 90s to mid 2000s, roughly about 800 sales per year. You're nowhere near that now. It's in the mid 5s, but that is certainly better than where you were about 10 years ago. So I think that churn upwards in the home sales has definitely had an impact on those birth decay ratios I showed you earlier when they're around 1.5. Here's the projections. So you have really 2 opposing forces going on right now. You have growth due to new housing on one end. Then you have, on the other end, pulling you down, the changing age structure of the community with lower birth counts resulting in lower kindergarten students 5 years later. And even though you have new housing, it's not enough to overcome the general demographic structure of the township. So you're still seeing, in my projections, a decline in enrollment for the next 5 years. So just as a little reminder, the enrollment as of October was 5,117. So we're talking about a decline of somewhere around 500 students. Actually, probably 450 if my math is right. So here's the enrollment projections by the grade configuration. Elementary, middle, and high, showing you what the enrollment is currently and what the enrollment is going forward. All 3 grade configurations are projected to decline. No one's going to escape. As I showed you right at the beginning, middle and high, you should have expected decline right off the bat. You saw those smaller elementary cohorts having to go through the system. It's going to take a while for this number here to stabilize. That's the elementary. And once that does, then you have stabilization at the middle and high level. So the last slide, before I sum this up, is what's called a capacity analysis. In your long-range facility plan, you have capacities of all the buildings in the district. And they're not hard and fast capacities that, it's exactly 500 students that cannot be exceeded. Capacities change in a school building depending upon how it's used. If you have a lot of special education classrooms, it's going to lower the capacity. If a building is over capacity, a district can get that building to be under capacity if you raise the student-teacher ratios. So again, it's a number you can kind of play with, but what we're seeing up here are the capacities of each of the buildings from the long-range facility plan, and it's just elementary grade configuration. I just summed them all together. And you can see that you have a surplus at the elementary level, and it's going to get bigger due to the declining enrollment, while there's a shortage of seats in N, which is we call unhoused students. It doesn't mean that they're unhoused, it's just a terminology they use in the architectural world. That's actually going to turn to a small surplus in 5 years due to declining enrollment. And finally, at the high school, while there is again a shortage there due to declining enrollment, that should also lead to a surplus. So, what's the takeaway? Well, the takeaways are enrollment is going to decline, and it's going to be lower at the end of the 5-year period. Why? Declining birth rate. Okay? Even though maybe, I say maybe, the declining birth rate has ended, that horse has already left the barn. Okay? Because those students still have to get into the system 5 years later. It takes 5 years to get those kids in. And that's leading to fewer children entering kindergarten. You do have inward migration here, but it's not enough to overcome the high negative kindergarten replacement. Okay? This is an excellent school district. Okay? If you weren't so great, it could even be worse. You would have even greater decline in enrollment. People want to move in here because of this. Great place. Most proposed housing units are multi-family units. If it was detached single-family homes, this would be a different story. But they do not yield as many children as a detached single-family home. And that's my last point there. And with that, I would like to open it up to the board for questions. That's okay. I could probably talk about it.
So I have a couple of questions. I'm going to start with a random one. The others are kind of connected. Historically, well, I should say, 10 or more years ago, it wasn't uncommon that the first grade class was larger than the kindergarten class because a lot of families elect for a private kindergarten or a continuation of a preschool education that kind of culminates in a kindergarten program. Is that in any way impactful with this?
I don't see that. Yeah, no. That's a while ago.
And then I just have some questions about how real estate trends factor into this. And I'm thinking of, and this is the second part of that, which is what about if there were an economic downturn? We saw going back to after the, as you pointed out, the OA housing market kind of tanking, we saw a rise in enrollment at the high school where kids, actually families took them out of private school because it was too costly to remain in private school. So is that in any way going to tip the scale one way or the other? And then one more question.
If I can remember all this.
You can jump in and just.
Okay. So talking about, one of the questions was the effects of real estate and also economic downturn. Where does that all play in, I suppose, in terms of our projection? If you go back to one of the things I showed you, so we talked about survival ratios, right? What you're not seeing in this report here is the ratios grade by grade. When we compute cohort survival ratios, it takes into account everything. It's like a catch-all for good economics trends, bad economic trends, good real estate, negative real estate. We cannot tease out in the values that you see over on the right-hand column what's causing all that. it more or less takes all the variables that you mentioned into the hopper, and this is what we get as the ratio, because we're not looking at any of those things specifically and individually. However, they all are taken care of in there. So when you see a rise in this particular case, look at the top right, 1.184 back in, that would be the 2010 school year, which would be a period of not such great real estate activity. Okay, fast forward to the current, into 1920, 1.519. I attribute that steep increase due to home sales. I can't say about economics and downturns and things like that. One thing you have to understand is what you see behind me is many people use the word projection and forecast interchangeably, but they're not the same. In my world, a projection takes a look at historical things and assumes that they're going to happen in the future. A forecast projects future trends. I am not projecting future trends in the economic or real estate markets or anything else. Okay, that's a completely different analysis. So I want to be clear that we're looking at your historical patterns and we're moving them forward. So if we did have an economic downturn that maybe took out these ratios and brought them down, this does not account for something like that. It's assuming that what's happened here historically in the past will again happen in the future. In fact, the projections in this particular case, I used an average for P/K of those two red ones there to be aggressive of what I think the inward migration is going to be in the future. I hope that answers some of your questions.
It does, thank you. Just lastly, something that I see professionally is that our community is in a period where, I think you know anything about the birth rate piece, there are a significant percentage of the population, those 3, 4, 5,000 square foot homes, who've been here 20 years and are sitting tight because the housing market is what it is. And the only people that are going to move into those homes are people with children.
Great.
Is there any way to address that eventuality? Because that's really what it is, and I'll just say anecdotally, all of my clients from elsewhere have young children, younger than 5.
That's a great question. Did everybody hear that? Talking about potential people selling their homes, 3,000 to 5,000 square feet. I actually get that question a lot. And I've been getting that question for about the last 10 years. And the question usually is, we're all waiting for the seniors to sell their homes when the housing market gets better. Two years ago, in the previous study I did, housing turnover analysis, doing exactly answering the questions that you just asked. And the answer to that question was, unless everyone sold their home all at once, you're really not going to have that kind of impact. And like I said, in the last 10 years I've been getting that question. Keep waiting to see for real spikes in long-term held homes, not seeing it. We always see a more even distribution. So if you were to look back at the 17 study, we looked at turnover rates by length of ownership for the detached single-family homes. And what we see is that your detached single-family homes have the highest turnover rates between 0 and 10 years of ownership. As you might think, at 30, 40 years of ownership, it's going to be spiking, right? Not the case. We just don't have that kind of exodus like that you might anticipate. It's a theory. I have not seen it quantitatively. It's not matched up.
Going along that, the new builds that they're building, they're also marking, they're saying that, yeah, there'll be people who want to downsize, say. So if you're downsizing, you're moving from a house, again, to an apartment. So now they're saying, oh, look, they built all these brand new luxury apartments, so it's downsizing to those. So I don't know, that have any effect, or do you think about that as? So now, I mean, maybe a lot of kids won't move in there, but they're going to be, you know, those houses that are available will be, you know, now they'll be available for them not to move into the cars, but to move into the houses.
Right.
But I guess the same.
Well, there's two factors there. So you're assuming that not only will the baby boomers leave their current homes, but they're going to stay within Burners Township. That's the premise. And that's not unreasonable. Because was reading an article in AARP magazine that you would think that a lot of 65-plus people would want to retire to North Carolina when things are cheaper. But they did a survey, and most of the people said they're not going to do something like that because why? Well, they're very involved in their community, and two, you can tell me, grandkids. They've probably got a lot of family right nearby. So the access to these southern climates isn't always what it seems. So they could. The thing is, we cannot guess whether or not they're going to be coming from Burns or elsewhere. Yeah, it's there. It's a potential. Yeah, I think, like I said, I truly believe that every time you have a single-family home that's sold here, you're probably getting kids that are moving into it. But that's what this is telling us right here. It's being captured. It's not like we're not taking it into account. It is there.
Back to in between, because I have two different unrelated questions. So the first one was when you're talking, you showed the housing turnover rates. I don't know what percentage in town are rentals, but I just wondered how that impacts in terms of turnovers and new families. And I guess I'll ask my other one too. My other one was I noticed in your map of where the births were happening, a lot of them were in, I think it was Cedars and Society Hill, which are not detached single homes. So I was just curious because the projection for the new housing is pretty low, but if people are, in smaller units already having more babies, that doesn't match up.
Right. So part of the problem with, I'm going to take your last question first. So as you can see, over the Mount Prospect area in the lower left there, this is back in 2005, yes, there could have been a lot of kids coming in these smaller attached. But the problem is that's one part of the township. There are other parts of the township where there is not that many children per type of unit, just the same like over in the Society Hill. So when we go forward, what do we use as a multiplier? Do we take the worst case scenario that happened here? It's a very small sample size. So I went with the township average. And there's no guarantee. I don't know who's going to move in there. No one knows. So we have to be conservative and use the township average rather than the worst case scenario that did happen there. But some of the yields were around 0.75, because if you go back to the study in 17, it shows you each development, list by list, or development by development, how many kids are coming out of that. And the other one was, remind me again, sales versus rentals. So in terms of what the rental population here, I don't study the rental property movement or things like that. So that turnover could, definitely impact the school district because kids are more migratory in rentals as opposed to houses. And in the 17 study, we didn't look at this in the 19 study, we did an overall demographic profile of the township showing how many owner-occupied versus renter-occupied housing units there. I just can't recall what it is off the top of my head. It's in the 17 study, not this one.
We'll take questions from the public in just a minute. Thank you.
The student yields per housing type. So they're just kind of individual numbers, but is there like a range associated with each of those, or kind of like not best case, worst case, but minimum case, maximum case?
All right. So I'll start with the apartments. The apartments, that was the only comparable property to study. Townhouses range from about 0.07 to 0.75. A huge range. So that's to the previous person's question. That was the question. What do we use as a multiplier going forward? I went with the average. Of course, now let's just assume, worst case scenario, if you had, say, 0.6 coming out, how much would that really impact the projection? Well, let's go back to this table. How many people are quick at their math? There's only 40 townhouses in this one particular development plan. 40 times 0.6 is 24. 40 times what I use, 0.3, is 12. So you're talking about a difference of delta of 12 kids. Okay, so we're not talking about anything earth-shattering, even if I'm wrong. All right? Going back to the detached single-family homes, which is 1.11, that's out of a distribution that I created joining the property database to the student address database. It shows the number of kids per home by length of ownership. So it's a distribution that would look like it goes up, and then of course if the house gets more older in terms of length of ownership, the yields go down. And I think it peaked around 1.4, but that's not what we want to use as our yield. We take an average, and that's the value. So, you know, length of ownership for single-family homes isn't similar to, I didn't look at it by development, I think of what you might be saying. I looked at township-wide, what's the distribution by length of ownership? I got 1.11, which is pretty high in my experience.
So last one, for
Yeah.
the enrollment projections, for the enrollment projections going forward from 2021 to 24, 25, that takes into account projections going forward for net inward migration, birth count, and then the additional housing.
Everything.
And then, so what did you factor in with the additional housing, which just was static 226 during one of these years, or are you phasing, how did you?
Great question. So with the 226 children, one of the things I have to try to figure out is where to put them, what years? Because some of them haven't been approved. Some of them, basically, you know, the Dewey Meadows Shopping Center, from what I understand, is just some site demolition that's happened. So I made some estimations that if something hadn't been approved yet, it would probably come online, say, in years 2 and 3 of the projection period. If something was under construction, it would come in 1 and 2. So I spread out each development, usually over a 2-year period. Again, estimation of when it's going to come online. And so in terms of how many they come in for elementary, middle, and high, which might be another question you might have, the distribution of elementary students is usually approximately about 60% of that 226. Middle and high is roughly about 20% each. And I'm rounding up and down a little bit just to make things easier, but that's usually what it comes out to be. And that's how I can phase them into. So, for instance, if there were 10 middle school students coming in from one particular development, I would assume that the distribution would be equal across grade 6, grade 7, and grade 8, roughly about 3 kids per grade level. Karen, I think the board might not have any other questions.
And it's just Mr. Harper. Just to keep the record correct. Someday maybe if I can make the time. So thank you, board members, for your question. Dr. Grimm, I would just ask you to stick around a little bit longer. We'll have a public comment section, and I ask you to jump in on
Okay.
questions. So you can stick around for a little bit longer. Thank you very much for your work.
Thank you.
Okay. We are up to the superintendent's report. We have 2 items. Would someone like to make a motion to move them? Linda and Suzanne. Just write that down. And
Okay, so just a couple of things to cover here. First and foremost, this is Thanksgiving week. So just a quick shout out to my employers. I'm thankful for my job. And of course, I'm thankful for health and family and all that good stuff. And I really hope everybody has a great Thanksgiving week and is able to take some time with family and really enjoy a nice long weekend and really good sausage, stuffing, and turkey, and pumpkin pie. And all that.